Wood selection of your guitar is important, whether you're making an acoustic or you're making a solid body electric. The properties of the wood really are important. The species, not so much. Now, there is, in the circles of the guitar community as well as luthier shops, the concept or idea of a thing called TONEWOOD. And what TONEWOOD ultimately is claiming that the species makes a difference in the end result of the actual tone of your guitar. And acoustically, wood does make a difference, acoustically. The issue is when you're building a solid body electric guitar, you're not dealing with acoustics. You're dealing with transverse waves, standing wave patterns on a string, and a pickup is registering a change in a magnetic, in the magnetic field and creating an AC current, sending that to the amp. It doesn't pick up acoustics. So the acoustics don't matter on a solid body electric guitar. If someone says you have to use this kind of wood for a warm tone or a bright tone and all this other stuff, they're wrong. They're wrong. That the species on a solid body electric is really irrelevant. So what is important is the properties of the wood, to make sure that it is stable, to make sure that it's the weight that you want, and to make sure that it is strong enough to actually hold on to the hardware. Is it going to be strong enough to basically be a guitar? These are the things that you have to consider. And also, do you like the way that it looks? Now, what I have right here on top, this is a piece of Spanish cedar. And I wouldn't use this for an electric guitar, although I could. This is more for things, people use these typically for acoustic guitars. This particular piece is actually going to be used for a humidor, right? So for cigars. It has a wonderful smell to it. But the reason why I have this out is because I wanted to show you, as far as the grain goes, you're going to see that many pieces of wood are cut not perfectly straight with the grain. Sometimes they're at a slight angle, and you can see that clearly in this piece of wood. We have more white here, less white here. You can see that this is basically about the same size right here, but it's kind of angled this way. Now, generally speaking, as long as the grain is actually straight like this, it's not going to matter too much. Ideally, you would want it to be perfectly straight with the cuts that you do. Slightly off is okay. This piece has been in the shop for probably 2 years. Shows you how long, shows you the priority of building a humidor. And it hasn't really warped that much. It hasn't twisted. It hasn't done too much. This is a pretty stable piece of wood. So let's look at something different. This is a piece of redwood. And I just took this out of the rain, so that's why you see some wetness on it. But you'll see that there's a crack on it. And to a person that is first getting into wood selection, they're not really familiar with it, they might see this grain on top and say, well, that's pretty straight, that's a good piece of wood. But as you can see here, it's cracking, and that's not good. You want to avoid things like that. And you'd have to ask yourself, well, why is this happening? If you look at the grain, you'll see that it's kind of tight and it starts getting larger here, and in the middle you have this piece that's kind of wavy like this. This is the core of the tree. This would be the center of the tree. The white is obviously closer to the outside of where the bark is. Now, when selecting a piece of wood, you can't just look at the front of it. You have to look at the sides of it and also the end. And if we look at the end of this, you'll see that the reason why this is cracking is because this is really going straight down the core of that particular piece of wood. You'll see it's dead center round right there, and it goes on the outside. Now the way that this is cut, this would actually fall under the category of quarter sawn, because what's happening right down here is the grain is going fairly straight up and down. The only problem is quarter sawn is supposed to be very strong. It's supposed to be the best way to do things like necks. But you can see, just because something is quarter sawn, if you do not pay attention to where the core is, you're going to end up with a really bad product and it might crack. So something from here over would be fine. Something from here over would be fine. You have to pay attention to cores. Also looking at this, we see that there's a lot of knots in this. And a knot is just anywhere that a branch was starting to come out or did come out. Knots have a different density than the rest of the wood. And sometimes, depending on the kind of wood it is, knots can pop out. Because of the different types of density as well within the knot and around it, sometimes the wood has a tendency to push up and out. So this knot might kind of start coming up this way, and the wood around it might want to start coming up like a little volcano. Even if you sand that, as time goes by and moisture either enters or exits the wood, you can see a difference within this area. So generally speaking, you want to avoid knots. You want to avoid knots if you want to have a nice clean finish. Sometimes a very, very small knot's not that big of a deal. When I say very small, we're talking about something, I don't know if you can see this one, like that. That is fine. That's very small. That's a twig. You know, branch, bad news. Also, with things like this, if the knot, see, I can just go like this and I can feel a difference because they expand and contract at different rates than the rest of the wood. But if I were to cut this and then run a router or something over it, the knot is a lot harder on your tools. And a lot of times it doesn't really shape well, and it'll want to chip out and crack and all sorts of stuff and whatever. It doesn't give a good finish. So if you can avoid knots. Now, some people like the way that knots look, maybe like on something like pine, and then so they'll purposely make a guitar that's got knots in it to kind of give it that old like village look, or what's the word I'm looking for? The old cottage look. And that's fine if you can get away with it, but you have to make sure that the wood has been seasoned correctly before you start using it. Seasoning just means that you have dried it. That's all. Which comes into the next topic, which is moisture content of the wood. But before I do that, let's look at this piece of mahogany. This piece, the reason why I have it here is because it's got good things about it, it's got bad things about it. And from this edge over to about here, it's got good things. It's pretty consistent, straight grain, whatnot. Pretty good. When we start coming over here, you start seeing the grain getting a little bit bigger. Now, on something like this, you'd want to, if this is a type of wood that you have access to, this is fine for something like a body, but you'd want to avoid something like this for a neck. The straighter the wood grain is, the tighter the wood grain is, the stronger the stronger the neck is going to be, and the more stable the neck is going to be. There's one more thing on this piece of wood I'd like to show you before we go into some more types of wood and we start talking about purchasing it. And you'll see at the end of this particular piece of wood, this is not good. This is not good. We're starting to get cracking here. We're starting to get cracking here. We're starting to get cracking here. And if we looked, now they paint the sides of these to protect the edges, but so I can't really show you what's going on over there. But if we looked at the side of this, we would realize, we'd see why this is happening. You want to avoid huge changes in grain like this. This type of stuff you avoid. Now, when I actually get ready to use this piece, from about here up, I can't really use for anything. So I'll probably end up chopping this here, taking this block and saying we'll use it for some type of project later on down the line. Chessboard, making wooden pins, chess pieces, who knows what it is, but this is not for guitar. When it comes to things like fretboards, you're going to see that there's a lot of different types of woods out there that you can use. This particular piece right here is ebony, and ebony, when you purchase it, will usually be covered in some kind of wax, and this is to protect it from getting moisture and whatnot, because it's fairly seasoned before you even get it. Not completely seasoned, but it's close. There's always going to be a little bit of white streaks inside there. That's okay. Those white streaks aren't going to hurt anything, and you can also stain the neck, the fretboard, to complete blackness if those little white streaks bother you. It's not necessary though. Ebony is a very dense, tight wood, and it's very durable. It's got some natural oils in it, so it's good for a fretboard. And since it's dense and tight, it holds on to frets very well. Whereas there's some types of wood that don't do that. This is also very durable. This is hard on your tools though. But this is what I prefer to use for my fretboards. This is a piece of rosewood. And a piece of rosewood, you'll see, this is actually, it's dense and it's tight, but it's nowhere near ebony. This weighs probably half the weight of the ebony. And this particular piece is actually very light for its size. And it makes me a little apprehensive about using this for a guitar, because it doesn't feel very dense to me. And for a fretboard, I want density. If it actually almost feels like a sponge, I can squeeze this and I can feel the wood giving. That means it'll dent. That means that it's going to, over time, by playing it and doing a lot of hammer-ons and stuff like that, it'll start actually doing indentation. This is not the type of wood that I would want to use for an electric guitar. Maybe a classical. That is for only this particular piece of wood, not for rosewood in general, just for this particular piece. One species does not always equal species. So just because you say, well, this is redwood, this is rosewood, they're going to have the same character. They do not. Every piece is completely different. Even from the same tree, two pieces of wood will be different. You have to find the right one for you. This, as you can see, has got a nice curve to it. We have a nice banana. This is another example of rosewood. This is rosewood. It's a different color, and you'll notice that this has got a similar shape to the core of a piece of wood, to a core of a tree. And because of this type of shape and the grain not being perfectly straight back and forth, it creates a banana. It makes it want to warp. This is not a good fretboard. If, on the other hand, this portion of this was not here, this would stay straight and flat, and it would be okay. But because of this, you want to avoid it, because this is the portion that's going to be taking moisture in and having it leave at a different rate than what's going on out here. And anytime that you have that, you're going to get bends and you're going to get twists and you're going to get warps. Consistency is very important when choosing the wood that you want. Now, when you go and you purchase wood, they go by fours. And what that means is this. They break up an inch into 1/4 inch measurements. So that would be 1/4 of an inch. But they break it up. So if you were to get 1 inch thick piece of wood, they would call it 4/4, because there's 4 quarters in 1 inch. So that's 4/4. Now, if you're building a neck, you can probably get away with using 4/4. Generally speaking, though, these are nominal numbers. In other words, if you were to measure it, it might not actually be 1 inch. It might be 7/8 of an inch. It might be 3/4 of an inch, right? So you have to measure the wood closely before you decide to say, this is the piece that I want, because just because it says 4/4 doesn't necessarily mean that it is. When building a body, what we want is 8/4 or 7/4. 8/4 would be 2 inches, and this would be 1 3/4 inches. Body's generally 1 3/4 inches thick. When you purchase a piece of wood, they are going to measure it like something like a piece of mahogany, hardwoods generally. What they're going to do is they are going to measure this by what is known as the board foot. And the board foot works like this. If we take a ruler and we measure from here to here, we get 10 inches. Okay? So this is not quite 1 foot, but a board foot is exactly that. A board foot is 1 inch thick piece of wood, 12 inches by 12 inches. Now once again, they will measure this nominally. So if it's 11.5 inches by 11.5, they're still going to charge you 1 board foot. If it is 12 1/8 by 12 1/4, they're probably still going to end up giving you 12 inches, so 1 board foot. So it's better to err on the side of more than less, because either way, that's how they're going to charge you. The distance between here and here is 10 inches. But this is actually 9 feet long, this piece of wood right here. And this is 2 inches thick. So what we can do is we can say 9 feet, okay, but we're going to times it by 12 because there's 12 inches per foot, right? So we come over here and we say that there's 108 inches. Now, 108 times 10, so we can 0, 0, actually no, that would be 0. What am I doing? We skip 1, we have 8, we have 0, we have 1, and we could have just added a 0 to the end, right? But I wanted to show you, oh, why did I do it? It's over here. So we have 1,080 square inches, okay? That's square feet, go like that, square inches, or you can go like this, square inches. Now, per foot, 12 by 12 is 144, okay? So that's how many square inches there are in a square foot. So if I take 1,080 and I divide that by 144, I get 7.5 board feet. But this is 2 inches thick. This is not 1 inch. This is only if it would be 1 inch. This is 2 inches thick. So I times that by 2. This is 15 board feet. So this board, from top to bottom, 15 board feet. So if this is 15 board feet, and generally something like mahogany might be around anywhere, depending on who you buy it from, when you buy it, etc. It might be anywhere from $12 a board foot to $16 a board foot. It just depends. So let's say that this is $14 a board foot. So you say times 14, $210 for this piece of wood. That's how much they're going to charge you. Now, this is once again 9 feet long and 10 inches wide. So I can get a pretty good amount of stuff out of it. There's only one portion of the wood I can't really use, which is right here. This is why lumber selection is so important, because you need to get the most for your money and you need to get what's going to work for the guitar, and you don't want to settle. It's rare you're going to find a piece of wood that's exactly like you want it. It's rare. Most of the time you'll find something that's got great grain over here, the proper width, and then it'll start tapering, and then it starts cracking or getting twisted at the other end. It's rare that you're going to find what you're looking for. But when you do find what you're looking for, buy it. Don't wait. Buy it. Because the chances of you finding it again are slim. Always check to see if the board is cupped, to see if it's bent. A slight bow lengthwise is normal. That's fine, as long as it's not too severe. If it's cupped this way, avoid that piece of wood. When buying large pieces of wood like this, you're going to have to mill them yourself, which basically means one side is going to be kind of straight. It usually isn't. It's supposed to be, but it's kind of straight. The other side is not. Okay, this definitely will not be. And to mill it means you might end up having to run this through a resaw, like a bandsaw or a table saw, to get one side perfectly straight. and then from there you measure over, and then you cut another line from that. You're going to be milling it yourself. When I purchase things like rosewood or ebony, I buy big pieces of it and I mill it myself. You can purchase fretboards by themselves just on the internet, right? And they're about $30 a piece, something like that, and especially if they've already got the fret slots cut in them. But to purchase a big block of wood and rip it yourself, you end up saving a lot of money. Ebony is very expensive. A piece of ebony this size, where I can get 3 pieces of 3 fretboards, would cost me about $90 for 3 fretboards. Okay, ebony is expensive. Things like rosewood, on the other hand, I can probably get a board like this for $10. You know, something like that. It's probably even less. It just depends on when I buy and where I buy the wood. This is pretty cheap. Maple is even cheaper. But when it comes down to lumber selection, all you have to do is pick the lumber that you want to use. That's it. Make sure that the lumber has a good straight grain pattern to it. Make sure that it's not cupped. Make sure it's not bent. And as what I use as a rule of thumb is this: the piece of wood should feel very light for its size and not very heavy for its size. If it's very light for its size, it's dry, and it's also going to make a light guitar, which people like. If it's heavy, there's a lot of water in it, and you're going to have to let it sit and cure until it starts lightening up. When it comes to fretboards, it's completely different. When you're using exotic woods for fretboards, typically you'd want a heavy piece of wood that seems heavy for its size. It's usually the exact opposite. Now we come into one more thing about wood selection, and that is moisture content. Moisture content. The lower the moisture, the better. Well, how do you know what the moisture content is? I mean, are you supposed to just lick the wood? No, you can buy moisture meters. This will tell you how much moisture is in a piece of wood. And these are cheap. These are under $20. So I've got this turned on, and all you do is you take these 2 leads and then you push it somewhere within the wood. And you'll look right here that this is way high. This just got taken out of the rain, right? This piece of wood you do not want to use for guitar, but you wouldn't anyway. This is redwood. So let's try this piece of mahogany, which is much harder to stab. But I've got it in here, and it's less than 10%. I can't even get that to move, okay? If it was more, if I saw this move up even to about 12%, I would say it's got to cure longer. I don't want to have any moisture in the wood of my guitars. Moisture in a guitar body or neck can cause a few negative things. Excessive weight is one. Another thing it can do is it can cause the potential for warpage or twisting, wood instability. And number 3, it can cause a sustain loss. It can kill sustain. It can cause damping. Acoustically, it would sound horrible as well. And it can also cause shrinkage or expansion. So everything has been routed out, the piece of wood was wet, but when it starts drying, it shrinks, and now all of a sudden all these parts don't want to fit anymore. So it's important to have a seasoned piece of wood. And seasoned just means that it's been dry. Some people say it's got to dry for 2 years, it's got to do all this other stuff for 10 years. When you use the moisture meter, when it says the moisture content is low, you're good. You don't have to wait much longer than that. What I do is, when I cut this next, because this piece I'm going to have to cut off before I do anything else. But when I cut this piece off, I'm going to take the moisture meter and stick it through the end grain as well in the center to see what kind of reading I get. Because that's going to stay wet longer than the outside, because this is what's exposed to the environment. What kind of wood should I use to make my guitar? The sky is the limit. when it comes down to what type of wood should I use for my fretboard, the sky is the limit. Just make sure that the wood is strong enough to hold the tension of the strings, and it can act like a guitar. Most woods will work. Most woods will work. The only thing is fretboard material. You should always lean towards something very dense and very heavy and very strong and durable. You know, there's some people that have made fretboards out of oak, and it works, but oak has a grain pattern that doesn't feel too nice. So if you don't fill up the grain, if you don't fill up the holes from the grain, your fretboard might feel kind of rough, and you don't want that. You want a smooth fretboard. But you can pretty much use anything that you want. Let's talk a little bit more about some different woods. We're going to get into flamed maple and spalted and stuff here in a second. But what I want to do now is I want to ask you, from what we've already seen, if you're going to be able to determine if this is a good piece, a bad piece, if it's flat sawn or if it's quarter sawn. Okay? So this is a piece of walnut. This is a scrap piece of walnut that I have. And looking at this piece, is this flat sawn, quarter sawn, or is this a good piece or a bad piece? I mean, if you saw this, would you say, you know, I can go ahead and I can use that for a guitar? This is one side. Here is the other side. Now, the answer to this is no. You don't want to use this for a guitar, okay? This type of stuff right here and right here, this is just a recipe for disaster. You're going to get cracking. You're going to get weird stuff going on. It's very bad. Now, you know, the portion from here to here looks nice, but the stuff that's over here, it's a no-go. You have to look on both sides, okay? You didn't see that if you only looked at one side of the wood. So when you're buying your wood, make sure that you turn around and look at it from every angle. A small little knot like this and like this doesn't look too bad, but these two guys right here, if we flip this over, these two connect to one another, okay? So, flat sawn or resawn, okay? Now, looking at this, it should be a dead giveaway that this is flat sawn. But if we turn this where we can actually see the side, you'll know for sure that this is flat sawn, okay? You can see how it's rounded over on the edges, okay? So this ultimately is a piece of scrap that I might use for some other project outside of guitar building. Here is a piece of maple that could potentially be used for a fretboard. Is this flat sawn, quarter sawn, and is this a good piece of lumber to use for a fretboard? Okay. This is definitely not quarter sawn, okay? And this would be a horrible piece to use for a fretboard. I mean, simply because of what's happening right here. It's all starting to crack right there, okay? It might look kind of neat, but the reality is this guy is going to end up starting to warp and bend and cup and stuff. It's a shame I can't find it. I was looking for it for 2 days trying to show this so I could show it in this video. It's an example of one of the worst necks I've ever seen built because of the wrong kind of wood selection, and it was a fender neck. And what we see here, it was even worse, dead center in the neck. It was actually a knot, and it went out like this. But what happened is it caused the neck to have this perpetual back bend that you just simply couldn't get out. It was ridiculous. And the person that sent me the guitar to have it repaired, thinking all it needed was a setup, I told him there's really little that we can do to this unless we actually end up taking off the fretboard, putting a two-way truss rod, and doing a bunch of other stuff in order to overcome the constant stress and tension that's happening dead center. So he ended up replacing the neck. But it was such a great example of the worst neck I had ever seen. That's why I saved it, and unfortunately I can't find it. But this is a piece that you would not want to use, okay? Here is a piece of ebony, okay? Now we can see that there's cracking right here. Okay, does it go all the way through? No, it doesn't go all the way through. We can also see that it's got a strange shape right here, okay, where we have some fairly straight grain, and all of a sudden it kind of twists and curves right there, where it's kind of a beginning of a knot. Now, would you say that this is a good piece for a fretboard or a bad piece? The answer to that is this is a bad piece. You wouldn't want to use it. Could you get away with using it if you were in a bind? More than likely, but it would be probably a bad decision. You're going to, because of the way that this is actually going to want to start curving this way when it starts drying a little bit more. As soon as you start seeing a crack, that means that within the grain pattern here, it's already weakened, and even if you start tooling it, you might crack more. This is just a bad piece. This might end up having to be used for another project outside of guitar building. We're going to get to this one here in a second, because this covers something else just like these guys do. Okay, now this is bird's eye maple. Okay, and bird's eye maple, well, we got some glue right here. Bird's eye maple, each one of these that we see here, each one of these little bird's eyes is actually a small little twig that was trying to grow out of the tree, but because of temperature or lighting or whatever reason, it couldn't really grow, so it stopped growing and it just created a little nub, and it kept trying to grow more and more and more. And that's what each one of these are. So they're basically little knots throughout the entire board. And if we look real close, we can see that there's actually really tight grain in this. Looking at this, would you say that this is a good piece or a bad piece? Okay. The answer to it is this is okay. It's not the best piece in the world, but it's also not the worst piece in the world. You could get away with using this. Okay, this is okay. But there are a few things about it that make me get real close to saying no, don't use it. That's one of the reasons why you might see some fret slots on here, but they were never finished. Because during the time I was cutting, I kept looking at it and I said, is this something I really want to put on a guitar? And I said, I'll get back to it. Maybe one of these days when I'm just building some scrap necks or something, I might use this, but I don't want to put this on a customer's guitar. But is it good enough to work as a fretboard? Yes. Okay, but does it really meet the standards that I want my guitars to reflect? No. Okay, so we can get rid of this one. Here is another piece. Okay, another piece of bird's eye maple. It's not as figured, but we have an interesting grain pattern on this. Is this a good piece or is this a bad piece? And the answer to this is an okay piece. I would have it this side up so that way it would look really neat when people look at it. This has actually been cut probably a year ago, and it's still very flat and it's stable. The only reason why somebody might say, nah, this isn't a good piece is because it doesn't have enough bird's eyes, little guys sticking out of there. But to me, when I look at this, I think that is an amazing grain pattern that would look great on a neck. Okay, and it's stable, so this will work. This is a good piece. This is a side that I would glue to the neck. This is a side that would stay exposed. Now let's get into these guys. Okay, first I'm going to ask you good piece, bad piece on these three, and then I'm going to get into another portion of wood that you really have to consider. Okay, this piece right here, this is canary wood. And looking at this, would you say that this is a good piece or a bad piece? And the answer is this is a good piece. This portion isn't. This portion up here isn't, okay? But the fretboard isn't going to go the full length of this unless I was making a bass or something. Okay, but this is a good piece. It's nice and straight. It looks good. Even this little section right here is permissible. That looks okay, actually, especially on this side. But like I said, the fretboard is not going to extend the full amount of this. This is a good piece, nice and straight. It's stable. This had been cut more than a year ago, and it's still maintaining its shape. This is good. Here's a piece of canary wood. Once again, good or bad. Okay, we can see holes right here. Okay, we can even see one up here. Sometimes insects will get inside the wood and it'll make holes and stuff. Sometimes it's part of the charm of the wood. But when we look at this, we can see this streak, and then it kind of curves, it goes to an angle. Good piece or bad piece? The answer is this is a good piece. This is a good piece. And one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is we can overlook certain portions of the grain pattern just if there's enough room that we can actually end up still getting a fretboard out of it, but not going dead center. You could shift the fretboard so that way this is dead center of the fretboard. Do you see what I'm saying? And as long as this is long enough and we can get enough out of it, this is good. We'll have a nice tight grain. It's even. It's got a lot of nice colors to it. It's stable. This is a good piece. This portion is not a good piece, right? Nor is this. But look at it more than just what you see. I mean, say, if I tilt it, can I get a fretboard out of that? Yes, you can. But this is an exotic piece of rosewood. And you'll see it's very dark, okay? There is a lot of oil in this wood. There is a lot of oil in this wood. And you'll see the grain kind of is fairly straight, but it's a little bit of a curve to it right here, okay? Good piece or bad piece? This is a good piece. There's nothing wrong with this piece, okay? With that being said, and this is going to be going on a 12-string acoustic guitar, okay? With that being said, though, we have to go into something that's very important now, and that has to do with wood sensitivity, allergies, toxins, and poisons, okay? There's some woods out there that they're not sensitizers, and the term sensitizer basically just means that if you're exposed to it either by sawdust getting on your skin, through inhalation, or getting in your eyes or anything along those lines, you can actually become allergic to it, or you may have an allergic reaction. There's some types of woods actually have toxins in them, okay? And this is one of the reasons why with some woods you have to make sure you wear protective gear like rubber gloves and stuff, as well as a breathing apparatus, some type of filter, eye protection, and do everything you can to prevent this stuff from getting on you. Now, somebody might ask the question, well, why in the world would you want to make a guitar out of something that is that poisonous? Well, because many times those pieces will be under something you'll never come in contact with, right? You might put a clear coat or something on it. On a fretboard, sometimes, only when it's in its particulate form is it really dangerous. Just touching it might not really do much to an individual. But at the same time, some of these oils that are in some of these woods are toxic, and they're sensitizers. So it might look beautiful and it plays well, and a person will start playing it, and at the end of a couple of months they start breaking out in blisters, or it starts getting chafed. They don't understand why. They think, hey, maybe it's a nickel sensitivity, who knows what it is. But a lot of times it's because somebody decided to use the wrong kind of wood. They didn't look into the wood first to see if it was actually something that contained toxins. You can look up online if certain woods have toxins in them, and if they are sensitizers. The last thing you'd want to do is every day use mahogany or maple or something along those lines, or oak, and not really be protected during the time that you're sanding and you're cutting, and you breathe some of this stuff in, and then next thing you know, you've become allergic to the wood and you can never use it again. You can't even be around the dust of it, okay? They're sensitizers, and many times if you get sensitive to one species of wood, you'll become sensitive to many other species. It's really important you do your research, okay? A lot of people, when they build a custom guitar, they're like, oh, I sure would like to use purple heart, or maybe leopard wood, or maybe snake wood, or whatever, and they have all these interesting woods, these exotic woods that they think look fantastic and that are kind of rare, and they think that would be so great to make a guitar out of. Do your research. Make sure it's safe to work with, and make sure afterwards you're not going to end up getting sick, or somebody else might become sensitized, or the oil might be toxic or something. Make sure of this stuff before you actually end up purchasing any of the wood. Now, with that being said, okay, I mentioned that this has a lot of oil in it, okay, and what that basically means is this. Well, the person is going to be able to have this guitar for a very long time before they have to put any oil on the fretboard in order to make sure that it never dries out. Okay, that's a good thing. But it's also a bad thing, because when it comes time to actually try to glue this to a neck, it's not going to want to stick, because it's like trying to glue a stick of butter to a piece of wood. There's too much fat and oil in it. The glue will not bond. So when that happens, when you have a very oily wood, and you'll know because you have done the research on the wood like I had just mentioned, it'll say it's very oily, or you can just tell by looking at it or rubbing it. The side that you're going to glue, what you do is you take a rag and you take acetone, and then you scrub the rear of it, and you just you try to get as much of the oil off of the back of this as you possibly can. From there, you put your glue on quickly, okay, and then you clamp it down. If you wait too long, the oil that is within the top portion of the wood will start finding its way toward the rear, and you're going to have to deal with the same situation again. Very oily woods, acetone and a rag, clean it up real well, then it'll grab. So now we're going to talk about things like spalted maple, okay? And this, interestingly enough, looking at this piece, we can see that they're not perfectly flat right here, okay? But they used to be. They used to be perfectly flat. This was actually run over a joiner about 8 months ago. But because of moisture coming in and out of the wood, we're getting stuff like this, okay? And if I come over here, that's a little bit better. But moisture is a problem with wood, okay? It entering and exiting. And let's do it like this, okay? So this has got a combination of flame, but it's also got some spalting to it. Spalted woods are a product of fungus, okay? And what happens is this fungus ends up getting inside the tree, and it's almost like a disease, and it starts affecting the actual cells of the tree, and it just kind of works its way around. People think it looks great, and it kind of does look neat. But the reality is this spalting right here is a mold. So working with this, once again, you have to make sure when you're sanding and you're cutting, you're dealing with molds, right? So you want to make sure that you're protected. But also, these molds weaken the cellular structure of the woods in these areas. So there's some people that have asked me in the past, or they've wanted me to build them a guitar made out of like just pure spalted wood, heavily spalted, and I tell them I can do it, but it's going to be a little weakened, right? You're going to have to kind of treat it a little bit differently. You have to, you know, it's weaker. It's been damaged by disease. Generally speaking, a lot of times when we look at a piece of wood and we say that's a beautiful piece of wood because it's got such a cool design, a lot of times it's because the tree has a disease. Just like burl, you know, burl, when you have like a maple burl or a walnut burl, or sometimes they'll call it burley, that's actually almost like that design is almost caused by what's equivalent to a tree tumor, okay, like a tree tumor. And they will often grow near the base of the tree, near the root, but sometimes they'll grow a little bit higher. And it looks wonderful, but you're dealing once again with something that's not quite right, you know, like a mutation or a disease. And does it necessarily mean that the wood is not strong enough? Anytime that you have something that goes against the norm, generally it's going to be weaker, okay? And when I say it goes against the norm, you know, we're dealing with knots, okay? That goes against the norm. And then in those areas, it's going to be a problem. Spalting areas, it's going to be a slight problem. Something like this, after this went through the joiner again, I could use this for a cap, okay, which is exactly the thickness of this. This is made for a cap. And then I could glue these two together, clamp them, make sure it's nice and tight, and use it as a cap. And I'm not worried about it because the strength is not coming from this, it's coming from the substrate underneath it, the piece of wood that is underneath it. When you're planning on doing caps and veneers, the sky is the limit. You can do whatever you want. Generally, I wouldn't go much more than about maybe 3/8 of an inch thick though for the top, unless you're planning on doing a carved top, like maybe like a Les Paul or something, or maybe even a Paul Reed Smith, and then you might want to go a little bit more, maybe 1/2 inch, maybe to 5/8. So here is a piece of veneer, and this comes from a flamed maple veneer, okay? And the reason why I have this out is because I wanted to show you about how wood like this is weak. And when it's in a very, very thin form like this, and I try tearing this, you'll see, look at how that tears, the pattern that makes, okay? That's an interesting tear, but that's the weakest spot of this particular grain pattern. If I come over here and try to tear it from the side, it doesn't really want to tear. It wants to follow the weakest link, just like a zipper, okay? And all grain is like this. It's always going to have its weakest link somewhere. So yeah, every piece of wood will end up having its own weak points. Things like flamed maple and quilted maple, they can be sometimes hard to work with because they'll have a tendency to chip out a lot, and they'll have a tendency to tear and splinter and whatnot. And the same thing happens with bird's eye maple. So when you purchase these types of woods, you have to be very careful on how you tool them. You know, you can't really just run them through a planer, because if you run it through a planer, it's going to probably end up chipping some wood out. It's usually better to run them through like maybe some type of drum sander, or just do everything by hand. The question of glue gets brought up a lot. What kind of glue should I use? Well, for solid body electric guitars, you can pretty much use anything that you like, as long as it's a wood glue. Don't use spray adhesive or epoxies. Those are not very good for any guitar. Titebond Original is the cheapest, and there's other brands like Gorilla Glue and stuff like that that are wood glue. Don't get the polyurethane glue. It'll say Gorilla Glue, but it'll be a polyurethane base. Don't use that one. You want to use a regular wood glue. Titebond works just fine, but it's not as water resistant as Titebond 2 and Titebond 3. Titebond 2 and Titebond 3 are actually a little stronger than Titebond Original. And what I will use, I mean, I will use this sometimes, but these two are usually the ones that I use the most. I want things to be watertight. I also want them to have as much strength as possible. Now, does that mean if you use Titebond you won't have strength? No. You can use this. There's a lot of luthiers that use just this, and they say there's no reason to use these other ones. But for me, a little extra insurance for 50 cents more doesn't hurt. Some people will bring up hide glue. Now this is a liquid hide glue. Typically hide glue you'll have to heat up in a container when you get the flakes and the granules of it. You heat it up and then you can use that. For acoustics it's great. For vintage instruments trying to match things, it's great. But it's not necessary. Now, wood glue, the difference between hide glue and Titebond, ultimately, the original, is this is a lot more sensitive to heat. You can heat this stuff up over and over and over, then it becomes gummy and you can remove things. But it's also sensitive to moisture. The way that this dries is a little different. This is what's known as PVA glue, which when it dries, it's similar to like a rubberized kind of plastic, where when hide glue dries, it's not so much like that. I only use this for very specific things. I typically, on solid body electric, I won't use it. It's not necessary. It doesn't have the strength. It doesn't really have the water resistance I'm looking for, and it doesn't have the heat resistance I'm looking for, where these guys do. So take it easy on yourself. Just pick one of these two guys, and no matter what you do, you're going to be just fine. While we're discussing glues, some woods have a lot of natural oil in them. Things like cocobolo, right? Things like cocobolo would have it, and certain rosewoods will have it as well. When you find a wood that has a lot of natural oils in it, the wood glue will not stick to it. Not worth a damn. So what you have to do is you have to take acetone, and you have to clean the side of the piece of wood that's oily. Clean it really well with acetone and a rag. Get a lot of that oil out of it, then apply your wood. And you need to do it fairly quickly. So as soon as you're done putting the acetone, you clean it a few times, no more oil is coming out, Then you go ahead and you apply your glue and you clamp it. If you wait too long, the oil from the rest of the wood will start seeping over into the part that you've cleaned up. Typically there's only a few woods that do that, but keep that in mind. So the more exotic the wood is, the more oil there's in there, the more you're going to have to take that oil off with acetone. Here is an example of a guitar that I'm working on that shows good grain structure. It's nice and straight and it's even down both sides right here. The only glue that I really have, this is what's known as an OGS build, where I have the seam that goes all the way up. And I only have glue right there. That's good. The less amount of glue that you have on your guitar, the better. So if you can make a body out of just one piece, that's better. If you can make a neck out of one piece, that's better. Glue is one of those things that you should try to avoid using if possible, but it's not always practical. But don't be afraid to use glue. I don't think that just because you've glued some pieces together it's going to affect the tone of your guitar, because it won't. And later on I'll show you exactly how to glue and clamp correctly to make sure that it doesn't get to the point where your glue is becoming detrimental to the way that your guitar performs. Now here's a piece of maple that I was practicing some coloring on, trying to match some stuff. And I have no use for this piece of maple. It's really too small for me to use for anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this in half, and before I do it, I'm going to run this through the joiner to make sure that this side's perfectly flat, this side's perfectly flat. And I'll cut this, and then I'll show you how to glue these two together and clamp them together. And this is exactly how you would do it for any guitar body. It doesn't make a difference what shape it is or whatnot. And the reason why I'm not going to actually do a guitar body right now is because if I ended up doing a guitar body, I'd have to wait for the glue to set up before I can continue showing you what the next step is. And the gluing is an important step, but it's nothing that is, you really have to, spend a lot of time learning how to do. Just me showing you how to glue these two pieces together is enough for you to know how to glue anything together. And once again, you could have three pieces. You could have, this one, another one, another one. You glue them and clamp them all the same. So let me take this to the joiner, and we will make these perfectly flat, and then I'll cut this in half and we'll glue it. So now that we have these and they're nice and flat, when I get these guys and I put them together, there isn't a seam. I mean, there's a seam, but you don't see anything. There's no gaps, okay? That's important. Now, when I first started building guitars years ago, I didn't use a joiner. Many times what I would do is I would just cut it with a table saw, and I would sand it with a block. And I got pretty good results that way, but this is really the best way to do it. So just like doing the neck, what we want to do is we want to put glue on here. We don't want too much and we don't want too little. We don't want to leave it like this. We want to spread it, okay? We want a nice even coat over the entire piece here. And if you're going to be doing a lot of bodies all at once, you don't have to use a little brush like this. It might be easier to actually end up using a roller, the type that, like a paint roller, okay? And making sure that we have it all the way down. This is actually, in my opinion, a little too much glue, in my opinion, okay? But it'll be okay. And then these types of brushes, this is just a flux brush. This is, or sometimes they call them a hobby brush. This is usually used by plumbers when they're doing the flux on the copper lines and stuff. But you can get these all over the place. If you buy something like this at Home Depot or Lowe's, you might get 4 or 5 small ones for a few dollars, okay? If you go to places like Harbor Freight, you get the exact same thing, except you get 50 to 100 of them for like $5. These things you're going to be using and throwing away. Don't spend a lot of money on them. They're all the same. This type I get at Harbor Freight. So that's finished. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these two pieces of wood and I'm going to kind of slide them back and forth, okay? And I want to make sure that both pieces of wood now have glue on them equally. I could have used a brush and did it on the other side, but I risk putting too much glue on here, and I've said it many times before, too much glue is just as bad as too little glue, okay? But now that I've moved this back and forth, and let's say I've got this exactly where I want it, everything is perfectly lined up, I'm going to end up taking my clamps. The reason why I have these clamps out is because generally when I'm doing it for a guitar body, I need large clamps, and you're going to need at least 3. Now I do have smaller clamps that would work for this, but that's not really what I would ordinarily use, so that's why I'm doing this. Now from here, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and start putting pressure on this, making sure that the top and bottom are lined up, okay? Sometimes these guys will want to go like this, and you'll have to kind of shift it and hold it with your hand and stuff. You know, you make sure that everything's lined up. I have it in the center here, I have it in the center here, and I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on it. I'll start seeing some glue pop up. If there is a curve on this, or you don't have your clamp straight, sometimes it'll cause these guys to shift. You have to adjust your clamp so that way it doesn't do that anymore, and then you continue, or just put a little bit of pressure, put another clamp on, and then tighten it, and then that will also help prevent it. And you're going to see that right here I'm doing the same thing, going about center. And then as soon as I get this where I have it fairly tight on here, I can lift it. Make sure that the back here is also flush, which it is. Make sure the top up here is flush, which it is. And I want to put a decent amount of pressure on this. I want to see glue escape from that seam, but I don't want to see all of it escape, because it'll, you know, you can push out a lot of the glue and make this a very weak bond. But that is good. And then here now in a couple of hours, this will be set up enough that we could actually start working on this and doing whatever we're planning on doing. This is how you do it, okay? Now, a question gets brought up a lot, and that is exactly how strong is glue? How strong is a glue joint? And if you glue something correctly and you use the right glue, it's actually stronger than nails. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this old guitar that I started building years ago, and messed up a couple of things, and it forced me to kind of do some stuff. I have no plans with it, and I'm going to try to break that glue joint that's between the body and the neck with a swing downward. I don't know if it's going to break cleanly. I don't know if it's going to break the first time. I don't even remember what type of glue I used, but let's see here. Okay, this is exactly what I wanted to show you. The glue didn't break, the wood broke. The glue is stronger than the wood grain. And looking at this, I can tell this is hide glue that is inside here. Okay, so I used hide glue to glue these two together. And that's impressive considering hide glue is not as strong as the PVA glue. It's not as strong as the tight bond. So when some people ask you, oh, I don't know if that glue's strong enough, or blah, 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 now you know. No, glue is strong. It's stronger than the actual wood that the neck is made out of, and this is mahogany. Now let's see if I can detach the carina from the mahogany. What we'll do is we'll set these two guys right here, and I'm going to hit right here at this seam to see if I can get this to break. There we go. That took a lot of force. But once again, what do you see? The wood would sooner break than the glue joint. And in this case, looking at it, I might have used hide glue for this too. I think that this is pretty much all the proof that you need that wood glue is very, very strong, okay? On many of these guitars that you see come in from China or like Epiphones and things, things where there's scarf joints, a lot of times you'll see that they break at the scarf joint. And the reason why that happens is because they're not using the correct type of glue, and they're over clamping it. Too much glue had been removed. Typically, those are the two reasons why those breaks happen. But glue is very, very strong, and you don't have to worry about it coming apart if you do it correctly. One last thing before I call this video finished is being able to read the grain of the wood, okay? And being able to read it is going to help you determine if it is going to warp or cup in a certain direction. And I'm going to use a flat sawn as an example, and then I'm going to show you the quarter sawn. Let's say we have a piece of lumber, okay, that basically looks something like this. And this is a flat sawn piece. And looking at the end grain, which this is the end grain right here, let's say it looks something like this, okay? Now, I have seen wood cup in both directions, but generally what you're going to see is if this is not cured and it's exposed to moisture and it loses moisture and it's exposed and it loses, generally what you're going to see is this guy is going to want to cup like this, okay? That's bad. That's really bad. And looking at this, you can tell, you'll be able to read the grain, because you'll sit there and say, generally, this is what happens, okay? And it has to do with when you're looking at a piece of wood, okay? We'll use this as an example. I won't draw anything. When you're looking at a piece of wood, there's portions of it that are going to want to absorb water more, or moisture from the air, more than other pieces. And when it absorbs moisture, it's just like a sponge. And we've all seen a sponge that it's been really, really dry. And then you put water on it and it expands, right? Well, it's the exact same thing that's happening within the wood. And it's usually the cellulose portion, the white portion, the lightest color portion, like in these areas, that is that spongy material. And so when it starts absorbing moisture, that's going to be the part that expands, okay? And you can think of the darker areas, or the late wood as they might call it, you can think of those as almost a sheet of metal that just simply does not want to expand. And when you end up having a piece, let's say that this is a piece of metal, and then this is a sponge right here, but this is a thin piece of metal, okay? And this sponge right here is very, very dry. As soon as we end up wetting this, okay, this end of the sponge, since this metal is glued to it, is not going to move, right? It's going to say, I have to stay put. But the rest of this will be able to expand, and it's going to expand like this, okay? And when that happens, it's going to put strain on this piece of metal. And what you're going to get is probably a slight cup like this, okay? And the exact same thing is going to be happening with a piece of wood. On flat sawn, you're going to see the expansion going in directions like this, okay? But not so much like this. You might see it at an angle a little bit because we have round here, round edges, and they're going to want to expand in those directions, okay? That's flat sawn. Now let's look at quarter sawn. If we have a piece of quarter sawn that's like this, okay, how's it going to expand? Well, if these are sponges, it's going to, think of it as sponges, it's going to want to expand this direction. So this can become wider with the moisture, okay? When the moisture leaves, it will start shrinking in this direction, and the same is true with flat sawn. It'll expand and contract depending on the cellulose portion and in relation to the late wood. Now, why is this important? Because let's say that this is our neck right here, and we end up putting our fretboard on here, and then it's radiused. This is our radius, okay? and we have some frets on here. Let's say that this is our fret, okay? And right now, everything's perfectly seasoned, whatever. We installed our frets, we've made them perfectly flush to the side of the fretboard, okay? Everything is gorgeous and beautiful. But you get sick, something happens, who knows, maybe you only want to have an oil finish on it, but the wood gets exposed to moisture. What's going to end up happening is at first it's going to expand because it's been exposed to moisture. And because of that, this fret is no longer going to set flush. It'll be a little bit on the inside of the fretboard, okay? This can also happen with fretboards that have not been seasoned correctly. They've got too much moisture in them, or they're really dry, you haven't oiled them. This is after the guitar's been around for a while, and then one day it just gets really humid outside and it absorbs that moisture and it expands, okay? Well, if this expands and this comes inside, that's not too good of a thing. But let's say we're dealing with something that's the exact opposite. It gets very, very hot and there's very low humidity. What's going to end up happening is this fret that's right here is going to end up sticking out of the fretboard, okay? And these changes are going to end up happening, and I've seen this a lot. People will run their hand down it and it almost cuts their hand because the wood was not seasoned well enough, or what ends up happening is they didn't clear coat the wood well enough, and they're not really thinking about the expansion and contraction correctly, right? And this type of stuff happens. And even though you might be able to clear coat a guitar and you put your oil on it and you think that it's waterproof, the reality is it's never 100% waterproof. You know, you put something like a clear coat that's nitrocellulose or a urethane finish, even though it's very thick, you might only be dealing with maybe like 98.9% waterproofed or something. There's always a little moisture that can get in and out, and you kind of have to keep this type of stuff in mind when you're building. That doesn't necessarily mean that you try to compensate for it early on by purposely making the fretboard bigger or something. It's just make sure that when you end up using the woods that you're going to be using, that they're seasoned, you've dried them very, very well. Because if there's moisture, if there's a lot of moisture in this, and you end up clear coating it, that moisture can still leave. Some of it can absorb actually into the fretboard and out of the fretboard, right? There's a lot of ways it can enter and exit. And as time goes by, that stuff's going to start shrinking because it's losing the moisture, but it can also gain. And you have to keep stuff like that in mind. The best way, like I said, the best way to make sure that this type of stuff does not happen is simply just making sure that all of your wood is cured well. This is one of the reasons why a lot of guitar manufacturers will kiln dry their wood. So hopefully you learned something from this video, and it will help you in your project of building your custom guitar, your dream guitar, because that's what this is all about. And until next time, I am William Gelvin, and I will talk to you later.